I'm just going to take a couple minutes to go through a code that I picked up on my 2001 Landcruiser. I think it's a common issue though with the early 4.7 liter 2UZ FE engines. Um, about 9 months ago, driving at highway speeds, I'd get this like ever so slight lag in power. Like I'd be cruising along at highway speed, 75 miles an hour, and all of a sudden, less than a second, I would just feel like the power just cut out. But it didn't affect RPMs. It wasn't an engine miss. It wasn't anything like that. And it was just very intermittent every now and again. So it never threw a code, no warning lights, nothing. But other than that, the vehicle operated terrific. So I just went through and mass airflow sensor. I bought the cleaner for that and went through and cleaned that really good. And then I also had a can of throttle body cleaner from other vehicles that I've owned. So I went through and cleaned the throttle body really good, thinking that, start with something simple. And it still would come up periodically. Again, never really bothered me too much because it was just so slight and so quick. And for a point in time, I thought that what was happening was, maybe I was just hitting like weird circular wind gusts, on the turnpike. This vehicle isn't very aerodynamic, so maybe a swirling wind caught me from behind or caught me in the front. But, eventually I kind of realized that it was something else. I had also gone to replace the fuel filter because I had kind of intermittent power issues on an old Jeep way back when. So I thought that might be it, and I was getting tired of looking at a crusty old fuel filter because the vehicle is 21 years old. So, flash forward to the present, and I was driving into work, and I was just kind of thinking to myself that I hadn't seen any of that issue with the power surges, and I'd actually just come back from about 1,000-mile road trip where the vehicle drove beautifully. And as soon as I was done thinking that, all of a sudden, boom, it happened. And I didn't think too much of it. But then a couple seconds later, it just kind of started going consecutively. So I all of a sudden had these really brief losses of power, like about maybe 4 bumps in a row. And then all the engine lights went on, and the car went into limp mode. And fortunately, I was only about a mile away from home, so I pulled into a parking lot, turned it off, turned it back on. And while all the engine lights were still on, I drove normally, drove it home. Checked the fuel cap, nothing. Again, I wasn't terribly concerned with it because it was driving fine. So I took it up to one of the auto parts places to run a scan on it, and they came up with a code P1121. And I was like, okay, they got a code now. And the message on it was coolant flow control valve. So I was like, I don't know what that is. So anyways, I went home with the code and I Googled it. And immediately, as soon as I Googled this code, there were forums pretty much all, in the 2010 range, all 4.7 liter, mostly I think Tundra and Sequoia owners, talking about this exact same issue. However, even though it was the same code, this P1121, they were talking about an issue with the accelerator pedal position sensor, APPS. And, I kind of wrote off the different messaging to the fact that, maybe they didn't have the right vehicle into the Scantron and just had Toyota and pulled up the code and pulled up a different message based on a different vehicle. Anyways, accelerator pedal position sensor. Every chat that I read through kind of had the same issues that I had. Driving along fine, all of a sudden a quick loss in power, and then in some cases you'd have the dash lights light up and you'd go into limp mode, turn it off, turn it back on, it drives fine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So real quick, the accelerator pedal position sensor is also known as the lever assembly throttle, and this is the part, 22060-50011. The Toyota dealer quoted about $472. I found it online for about $320 with shipping and with tax. It ended up being about $350 delivered to my door, which was fine. Very easy job to do. If you have a Toyota repair manual, it is in volume 2, and you can actually go to SF39 where they have the accelerator. They call it the anyways, they call it the accelerator pedal position sensor somewhere in one of these pages. But otherwise, it may be called the lever assembly throttle. The one thing to keep in mind is it is not the throttle position sensor. If you can see that there. And a lot of times you may, I also read that in the chats where people go to the dealerships and this is the part that they give them, the throttle position sensor, but it is this part. It is the accelerator pedal position sensor. So real quick, very easy to replace. Just 3 bolts here and 1 connector. I actually broke the connector because it was very brittle, so I ordered a new piece, so I'll have to replace that later. But this thing comes right out. The only real issues with replacing it were these screws. I'm showing you one right here. You can see where I kind of mucked it up a little bit, so just be careful with those. As soon I got 2 out pretty easily, and this one I started having problems with, so I had to fish around, and I think I had to get this was a focus. This was a screwdriver that fit perfect, and I was just able to crack it out of there no problem. The other piece that gave me problems was the throttle cable here. Again, this is a 22-year-old vehicle, and it was probably never replaced. I mean, I got a 99% certainty that it was never replaced. So this thing took a little bit of coaxing to come out. I actually, if you take a look at the old one here, once I came in, I had to take this bolt off and this bolt off and then pull the whole thing apart. And then I was able to tap that little lug at the end of the accelerator cable. I was able to tap it through from the opposite side. But once you take these bolts off, you can just pull this thing apart. And since I'm not reusing it, it wasn't a big deal. The issue, I think, this is fairly common with Toyota and Lexuses, particularly with the older models that have the throttle cable. But if you see here, you've got those 4 pins that the connector kind of connects on. Back in here, there's a little circuit board, and wires connect these pins to the circuit board. And I think what happens is the solder points start getting brittle and they start cracking. And that creates the issue with this sensor here. It's just over time, those solder points. So there are YouTube videos of people kind of cracking this case, going in and fixing the solder points, et cetera, et cetera. I'm very happy to just spend the $300 and end up with a new part that hopefully will last me 10, 15, 20 years. I don't know. But that's it. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You can also find these, if you're so inclined, on Amazon for about $50 if you don't want to spend the $350. But I'm more of the thought of going OEM and trying to get as much money out of it, or as much mileage out of it, as I absolutely can. So hopefully that helps. Again, the accelerator pedal position sensor, 3 bolts, with the exception of just trying to have to finagle this out and deal with a little bolt here and cracking this. It would have probably been about a 15-minute job start to finish. Thanks.